This is the Brexit Britain envisioned by UK Treasury Chief George Osborne, who abandoned long-held plans to produce a budget surplus by 2020. We will continue to be tough on the deficit, but we must be realistic about achieving a surplus by the end of this decade, Chancellor of the Exchequer Osborne said. Osborne warned earlier this week that more austerity would be needed following a shock decision by British voters to leave the European Union. Tax hikes and spending cuts are both on the way, he said. The referendum result is as expected likely to lead to a significant negative shock for the British economy, he reiterated Friday. How we respond will determine the impact on people's jobs and on economic growth. Osborne warned ahead of the vote that an emergency budget would be needed to fill a black hole of about £30 billion, $42.6 billion, per year if the UK left the EU. Critics dismissed the warning, and accused the Treasury official of running a campaign based on fear. In the wake of the Brexit referendum, the Office of Budget Responsibility, which provides independent analysis to government, cancelled plans to issue new economic forecasts this month. It won't give a judgment on the fiscal fallout of the vote until the fall. But bank economists have already slashed growth forecasts for this year, and next. Some predict a recession. On Monday, Standard & Poor's and Fitch Ratings both downgraded the U.K.'s credit rating. The weaker credit rating could make it harder and more expensive for the UK to borrow money and finance its debts. The UK has the second highest budget deficit in the G7 after Japan. And gross government debt is already £1.7 trillion, $2.24 trillion, or 90% of GDP. Theresa May, the leading candidate to succeed David Cameron as Prime Minister, said that the government should borrow more in an attempt to avoid raising taxes. We should no longer seek to reach a budget surplus by the end of the Parliament, May said a speech announcing her candidacy. Fiscal stimulus is likely to be preceded by monetary stimulus from the Bank of England. Bank of England Chief, economy needs our help, fast. Governor Mark Carney said the bank's forecast that there would be a significant slowdown in growth in the event of a vote to leave the European Union was likely to come true. Does anyone in the country think that these risks have not begun to manifest? He told reporters on Thursday. In my view, the economic outlook has deteriorated and some monetary policy easing will likely be required over the summer. The pound fell by 1.5% to $1.32, not far above the 31-year low hit in the immediate aftermath of last Thursday's EU referendum. The total loss since last Thursday is about 12%. Many independent forecasters have already slashed their forecasts for the world's fifth biggest economy for this year and next. The U.K.'s credit rating has been cut. Some are even predicting recession, as the uncertainty about Britain's future weighs on spending and investment by consumers and businesses. The sharp fall in the pound could help exporters, but it will push prices of imported goods and energy higher, leaving people with less money in their pockets. Carney said the central bank would make a preliminary assessment of the fallout on July 14, before considering how to respond in August. Related, 3 hard truths for UK and EU divorce talks. UK interest rates currently stand at a record low of 0.5%. The Bank of England could cut them further, or revive a program of quantitative easing, creating new electronic money to buy assets such as government bonds. The program was launched in January 2009, and the bank has already bought assets worth £375 billion, $495 billion. It hasn't raised the ceiling since July 2012. The asset purchases are designed to get more cash flowing through the economy. But Carney has just one vote on the bank's Monetary Policy Committee. Whether it responds quickly to the Brexit threat will depend on the views of the other 8 members. Brexit threat: $43 billion in tax hikes and budget cuts. The man in charge of UK government finances is threatening he'll have to hike taxes and slash spending by tens of billions if British voters choose to leave the European Union next week. Chancellor George Osborne, head of the UK Treasury, said he thinks he would need to introduce an emergency budget to fill a black hole of about £30 billion, $42.6 billion, per year in the event of a Brexit. Those in favour of leaving the EU say wide-reaching regulations from Europe stifle UK businesses, and that immigration is damaging British society. They say leaving the EU would boost the economy. Those campaigning for the UK to remain in the EU paint a much grimmer picture. They say a Brexit would make trade and investment suffer, trigger a recession, kill jobs, slam the pound and cause house prices to fall. Osborne said that in the event of a pro-Brexit vote, he'd have to consider significant cuts to the National Health Service, defence and education, as well as tax hikes on income, fuel and alcohol. British Prime Minister David Cameron backed Osborne's assessment Wednesday, saying the expected budget shortfall was based on independent research from the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. But these comments were met with anger by nearly 60 members of parliament that support Brexit. It is absurd to say that if people vote to take back control from the EU that Osborne would want to punish them in this way, said the politicians in a public letter. This is a blatant attempt to talk down the market and the country. A win for Brexit would shape the future of the UK and Europe for decades to come, changing the way the UK does business and trade with Europe. Prime Minister David Cameron would also face huge pressure to resign. A vote to remain in the EU would maintain the status quo, including the free trade of goods and services with 27 other members of the European Union. The truth about UK immigration. Britons will vote on June 23 whether the UK should remain a member of the European Union of 28 countries. One hot topic in the debate is immigration. EU citizens are allowed to live and work in any EU country, and many have come to the UK, attracted by a relatively strong economy. People campaigning for the UK to leave the Brexit scenario argue that the country will have greater control of its borders and immigration outside the EU. That's debatable. Non-members such as Norway and Switzerland allow EU citizens to come and go freely in exchange for unrestricted trade access to the huge EU market of 500 million people. Here are some of the key facts and figures you need to know as the historic referendum draws closer. Net migration up sevenfold since 1991. Immigration to the UK in 2015 was nearly double the level in 1991, the earliest year for comparable data from the Office for National Statistics. Roughly 630,000 people moved to the UK in 2015, which is more than double the number of people who left the country. Net migration for the year, the difference between the numbers coming and going, was 333,000 people, up from 44,000 in 1991. Prime Minister David Cameron has said he wants to cut net migration to the tens of thousands. Immigrants into the UK can be divided into two broad categories: people with EU passports and people with other passports. Nearly 49.5% of foreign immigrants had passports from other EU countries, such as Poland, Ireland, Italy, Lithuania, and Germany. Meanwhile, 50.5% had passports from countries outside the EU, such as India, China, and the US. 8.3 million people in the UK were born abroad. Increasing immigration has changed the makeup of British society, particularly in London. The latest available data for 2014 show that roughly 8.3 million people living in the UK were born in another country. That's equivalent to 13% of the population, up from 8.9% in 2004. 3 million of them have gained British passports since arriving in the UK. London equals diverse. London is by far the most diverse region in the UK, according to a House of Commons report based on ONS data. Roughly 36.5% of Londoners were born on foreign soil. London is a magnet for immigrants as it boasts a thriving financial sector, vibrant tech scene and strong job market. Across the rest of the country, the vast majority of the population consists of people born in the UK. In many regions, less than 10% of residents were born abroad. Germany is number 1. The latest European data show Germany has the largest number of foreign passport holders in the European Union. The UK comes in second place, followed by Italy, Spain, and France. Trading places. The House of Commons estimates that about 1.2 million British people live in other EU countries, while 3 million people from other EU states live in the UK. The Oxford Migration Observatory estimates that of the 3 million EU-born migrants who live in the UK, about 1.9 million or 63% are working. The Brexit referendum. As voters decide whether they want a Brexit, the topic of immigration continues to come up. Some say higher immigration strains services such as education and healthcare, exacerbates a housing shortage, keeps wages low and can put British workers out of a job. Others argue that immigrants bring valuable skills, boost economic growth and support the nation by working and paying taxes.